Story 1. The silence in room 314. Rachel had always loved old hotels. The rich history, the faded grandeur of a bygone era, the sense of stepping into a different time. That's why, when she stumbled upon the Grand Wilson Hotel on the road trip, she couldn't resist booking a room. The concierge was an older man with a slow, deliberate way of speaking. When she asked for a recommendation, he hesitated before mentioning room 314. "It's a bit more private," he said, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place. "Not many stay there." That only intrigued her more. The room was quaint, with heavy curtains and dark, wooden furniture that creaked when touched. There was a peculiar stillness in the air, as though the room itself held its breath, waiting for something. She unpacked quickly and decided to explore the town, not thinking much of the eerie quiet. That night, Rachel lay in bed, the only sound the steady ticking of the old-fashioned clock on the nightstand. She drifted off into a light sleep but was jolted awake a few hours later by a noise. It was soft at first, a faint scraping sound, like nails brushing against the floor. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing. Just when she was about to lie back down, the sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from the ceiling. Rachel's skin crawled as she stared upward, but there was nothing to see, just the smooth surface of the plaster above her. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was an old building. But then it grew worse. The scraping became a cracking sound, like something heavy was being pulled across the ceiling, slow as a whistle. She felt a traceable panic rising but forced herself to remain calm. Maybe it was plumbing or something harmless, but then it spoke. A voice, barely above a whisper, echoed in the room. It wasn't clear what it said, but the tone was unmistakable, something angry, something warning her. Rachel shot out of bed, turned on all the lights, and sat on the edge of the bed, her heart hammering in her chest. She stared at the door, debating whether to run, but something kept her there. A compulsion, as though the room itself was daring her to leave. The dragging noise stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. She lay awake the rest of the night, eyes wide open, waiting for the sound to return, but it never did. The next morning, exhausted but determined, she went to the concierge. He was already watching her as she approached. "I need to check out," she said, her voice strained. He nodded, his face expressionless. "Did you sleep well?" Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but words failed her. His question hung in the air between them, and she realized something chilling. He already knew the answer. Story 2. The treehouse in the woods. When Tim was young, he and his friends used to spend their summers exploring the woods behind their neighborhood. At the heart of those woods stood an ancient oak tree, towering above the others like a guardian. Hidden among its branches was a dilapidated treehouse, long abandoned, or so they thought. The kids made it their mission to claim the treehouse as their own. Armed with hammers and nails, they set about restoring it, imagining grand adventures within its wooden walls. But as they worked, strange things started happening. One afternoon, while Tim was alone, hammering a loose board into place, he heard it. A voice, faint and raspy, calling the kids. He stopped, peering over the edge of the treehouse. No one was there. His friends had gone home hours ago. He shook it off and continued working, but the voice came again, this time closer, almost right behind him. "Tim," he spun around, his hammer raised, but the treehouse was empty. Terrified, he clambered down the ladder and ran home. He didn't mention the voice to anyone, convincing himself it was his imagination. But that night, he dreamed of the treehouse, dark and looming, its windows glowing with a sickly yellow light. Inside, he could see figures moving, shadowy and distorted. The next day, his friends urged him to come back. Reluctantly, he agreed, not wanting to seem like a coward. As they climbed the ladder, Tim felt a growing unease. The treehouse looked different, older, more decayed. When they reached the top, they found something they hadn't noticed before. Carvings in the walls. Names, hundreds of names, scratched into the wood with something sharp. Some were old, nearly faded, but others were fresh. Too fresh. And at the bottom of the list, in jagged letters, was his name. Asterisk asterisk Tim asterisk asterisk. He stumbled back, his stomach twisting. Who did this? He demanded. But his friends swore they hadn't touched the walls. That night, the dream returned, worse than before. This time, he was inside the treehouse, and the figures surrounded him, whispering in voices that sounded like dry leaves rustling in the wind. One of them reached out, and he woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The next morning, Tim refused to go back. But the treehouse wasn't done with him. He could hear it now, the voice, whispering his name wherever he went. At school, at home, in his sleep. It was always there, just out of sight, calling him back to the woods, back to the treehouse. And one night, when the pull became too strong to resist, Tim left his house and walked into the woods, disappearing into the shadows of the ancient oak. He was never seen again. Story 3. The mirror's reflection. Sarah loved collecting antiques. There was something fascinating about the history attached to old objects, and she could spend hours in dusty shops searching for the perfect piece. So, when she found the mirror, she knew she had to have it. It was an ornate, four-length mirror with a But over the next few nights, she began to notice something strange. At first, it was suddenly the reflection seemed off, as though the room in the mirror wasn't quite the same as the one she stood in. She chalked it up to the distortion in the glass, but the feeling grew stronger. One evening, as she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, she saw it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, passed behind her reflection. She spun around, her heart racing, but the room was empty. Convinced it was her imagination, she went to bed. But the next morning, things were worse. The reflection had changed. The room in the mirror was darker, the colors muted, and the furniture slightly rearranged. But most disturbing of all was her own reflection. It wasn't moving. Sarah stared in horror as her reflection stood perfectly still, even as she shifted from side to side. Then, slowly, her mirror itself smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across her face. Panicked, she grabbed a blanket and threw it over the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. But the smile haunted her. That night, she dreamed of the mirror. In the dream, her reflection stepped out, dragging itself through the glass, its movements jerky and unnatural. It crept toward her, its smile widening until it split its face in half. When she woke up, the blanket was on the floor, and the mirror was uncovered. Her reflection was normal, but she knew better. From that day forward, she avoided the mirror. But at night, when the house was quiet, she could hear it, the faint sound of something tapping on the glass, waiting for her to look.